I'm going to start with thanking you because I read your book last night. I was preparing for this interview with you today. One of the topics that you touched on was school refusal. And guess what? Right on cue this morning, my son, 6 years old, I don't want to go to school. So I just read about it last night. So I'm like, I'm prepared. I can do this. Usually I would focus on the fact that, we're running late. There's no time for discussing. Just get ready, get going, get out of the door. I thought, okay, I'm going to pause. I'm going to chat with him. I'm going to use some of the points that you raised in your book. He's at school. I'm at work. I didn't have to do it with twisting his arm. So thank you.
That's the best thing. So as somebody who does what I do, hearing you say that, I feel like I could float out of the building right now. And the way that you're describing it, I know that you haven't shared a lot of details, but it sounds to me like you did it in a way that preserved the relationship. It sounds like you did it in a way that honored his expression of frustration, and yet you were able to work with him to get him there in a way that you could both feel good about. That's what I'm hearing in the way you're sharing that story.
And it was probably one of the first times that we've ever done that. Usually it's a lot of complaining, but yeah, we were laughing and we actually had fun. So it was.
So tell me what you did. I mean, if you're laughing and having fun, how did you do that?
It started off with, the whole empathizing. And then I remember what you said about how school was really, it's really bad for kids in the sense that they don't feel competent. And so I nutted in on that and I asked him, is that why? And he started going on and he started exploring that and expanding on that. And then, but it wasn't in a really like tragic way where he felt like he was the dumbest kid in class, but he still didn't feel competent. Then it went on to talking about his friends and how he felt like, maybe his friends were making fun of him. But then I started drawing on that. And I could feel like he just wanted to say it. He just wanted to say what he wanted to say. And then there was a switch in his mood after that. And so that was when I could feel like I could bring in a little bit more of jokes in. And he was talking about how his friends were saying that he was dumb. And then I asked him, if his friends called him a giraffe, would he think that he's a giraffe as well? So if he's not a giraffe when his friends calling him a giraffe, why would he be dumb if his friends call him dumb? And then it started getting ridiculous. He started, talking about funny things. And then we just moved on from there. And it was like, oh, wow, I need to prepare this for you to go to school. Do you want to help me do it? And then suddenly it's like, yep, I'm coming.
Melody, I know that I'm the parenting expert here, but you've just given us a masterclass in parenting. And I want to unpack it for people who are listening to what you've done, because it's sublime in its simplicity, but also in the profound way that it impacts on children's well-being and our relationship. So the first thing that you've done is when he's told you he doesn't want to go to school, you haven't gone into command and control mode. You've actually preserved the relationship. He wants to feel seen, heard, and valued. That's what he needs more than anything. That's the number one thing. And by you acknowledging how he's feeling, you've done that. You've met that need. But the second thing that you've done that's just brilliant is all of our children want to feel like they're competent and capable. And school is a place where quite often they don't feel that, whether it's because of their peers or their teacher or the curriculum, whatever it might be, or maybe they've got additional needs. I mean, we know ADHD kids who have an autism diagnosis, they tend to feel incompetent rather than competent. And no one wants to go to a place where they feel incompetent. So by you addressing that, what he now knows is that you see, hear, and value him, and that you get how he's feeling. And then you've done this beautiful thing where you've brought some humor in. This idea of, well, if your friends called you a giraffe, would that mean you were one? That's so great, because what happens is humor brings emotions down, and it helps us to be open to the power of suggestion. It helps us to be open to new ideas. And you've been able to extend that you've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous as he's become increasingly jubilant in the way that he's expressing this. And all the way through, you're working towards this conversation. So let's get you off to school. What do we need to do? You're meeting what psychologists call basic psychological needs. And when we do that, our children feel motivated, they feel well, they feel healthy. I mean, you've ticked every box. I love this story. I'm so glad you shared that.
And I have to thank you for that, because without that, without your book, it would have been a yelling match.
Well, let's call it a team effort because you did the work. I might have written some stuff down, but you were the one that implemented it. And that's the hardest thing, because the temptation, and this is why we do such a bad job at parenting, we're so time poor. We're under so much pressure. And we think that we have to do the expedient thing now. We've got to get the kids out the door. We've got to get everyone in the car. Otherwise, we're going to be late and everything's going to be horrible. And what you've been able to do, and when we get into that mindset, our emotions go up, which means that our intelligence goes down. And then we stop meeting their basic psychological needs. We get cranky at them and we rupture the relationship. We get mad at them, which makes them feel incompetent. And we start telling them what to do, which makes them feel like we're controlling them. By you stepping back and staying nice and level and balanced, you've been able to take a really intelligent and empathic approach, and he's responded to that. And I love that story. It makes me happy to hear it.
It's funny that you said about the time poor thing, because it's a question that I'm going to be asking a little later, but we'll build up to that, because yeah, it's something that I discovered is it takes a lot of time. And this morning, yes, I took the time, but then towards the end, we started rushing around like mad chickens because we were late, because we took the time to do that, and so we were late. But it was in a happy mood rather than a yelling mood, so I think that's a win.
Melody, there are a couple of points that we need to extract from that conversation piece. The first is that teachers at school would rather your child show up 5 or 10 minutes late, happy, than 2 minutes early and stressed or crying. I think that it's really important that we're able to slow it down where we can, where we need to, even if it does mean a little bit of additional inconvenience. What happens by going through the process that you've gone through this morning is that we've taken the slow approach this morning, but it means that subsequent experiences will probably get quicker and quicker and easier, because we've laid a really steady, firm foundation right now. Next time this happens, you can say, you remember that chat we had the other day? Remember the giraffe? Remember, and you can reflect on that, give your child a hug, and he'll be like, yeah, okay, I got it. And you can just move on with things. Whereas if we say, hurry up, why won't you listen? You're going to be late. If we do that, we have to do it every single day, every time it comes up. It's a really ineffective way to operate. The late, great Stephen Covey said, we need to remember that fast is slow and slow is fast. Today, you've gone slow, but that means next time you'll go a bit faster and a bit faster and a bit faster, because you've done that. You've done the heavy lifting. Make sense?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's good. So maybe I'll tell you next time what happens if he does it again.
Yeah, I want to hear.
So we're here to chat about your book, The Parenting Revolution. I guess maybe my question would be, what makes it different? We've already talked a little bit about it, but what to you makes it different from other parenting books out there?
I don't know another book on the planet that reads like this in terms of helping parents. Let me explain why. Historically, parenting books, well, there's all kinds of different approaches to them, but this is a parenting book that looks at a science-based style of parenting that nobody's ever written about before. It's literally that simple. We've got a whole lot of scientific papers that are out there, a whole lot of scientific principles, but nobody's written about them. So, I mean, a few years ago, well, hang on, let me think. How long ago was it? About a little over a year ago, I had a parenting show on the television on Channel 9. It was like this hit show called Parental Guidance. And in that show, we brought a whole lot of different parenting styles together. And we basically looked at how parents are raising their kids and what sort of outcomes do you get with each parenting style. And that got me thinking, I wonder if I should write a book about parenting styles, because there just isn't one out there. Like, as far as I'm aware, there's no parenting style book on the market. And so I had a look around, couldn't find anything, and began to write the book. And I wrote about all the different parenting styles that there have been historically from a science point of view, and how with Instagram and mummy blogs, we've all got all these other parenting styles like tiger parents and leaf blower parents. Have you heard of leaf blower parents?
Is that similar to lawnmower, or is it different?
No, totally different. So a lawnmower parent kind of mows down all of the problems out of the way. A leaf blower parent is very loud, very aggressive. They don't actually deal with stuff so much as they dramatically blow it around so that someone else can clean it up. And And then there's the iPhone 6 parents. They're old and sluggish, and they're often slow on the uptake, although sometimes they're a lot more reliable than their more up-to-date parents, despite being quite quirky and cracked. And of course, there's the Tesla parent, quiet, attractive, ostensibly better for the world, but loathed by all the other parents because they're so sanctimonious and they look so good. And then we've got gentle parents and tiger parents, and we've got helicopter parents. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on. There are so many different parenting styles, but there's not a lot of scientific evidence to support any of them, quite frankly. And I was getting really frustrated about all of these parenting styles that are proliferating, and yet the one that's the most important, no one ever talks about. And so that's what the book is about. It's about need supportive parenting and how we can tap into those basic psychological needs that kids have and be better parents because of it.
Awesome. There was in your book, you wrote about the fact that there's this common saying that there's no right way to parent, and it's very, very popular now. I really like your response that, while it's true to a certain extent, that there are definite wrong ways to parent, and that science backs, and that's where you started talking about the science that backs the characteristics and the principles that parents should adhere by. There were 3 that you came up with, and I've got a few questions, and I'm going to go through them one by one.
Right.
So the first one, you said that children need to feel connected with us, to have the feeling that they matter. And this means having warm, supportive, and involved parents. And, this translates to spending meaningful time. And we've talked about it earlier. So love to children, to you, it spells T-I-M-E. That's the question. You've acknowledged it yourself. The style of parenting that you're advocating is a form of slow parenting. It takes time. In a time-poor society, what kind of tips can you give busy parents to find the time to be present with their children?
Okay, so there are a handful of things that we can talk about here. Let's start with mornings. Melody, how much time do you feel like you have in the mornings when it comes to getting you and your family ready and getting out the door? None. It's so intense, isn't it? And yet, with a little bit of a gentle tweak, we can make mornings feel, well, they're always going to feel busy, but we can make them feel much less rushed, even though there's plenty to do. So I've worked out, having raised 6 of my own children, that there are about 5 things that most kids need to do in the morning. Just 5. They need to have breakfast. They need to put their uniform on. They need to pack their bag, which will include any books and school lunches and that sort of thing. They need to brush their teeth and hair. And I don't know, maybe there's a 5th thing like tidying up their room or doing a little bit of music practice.
Shoes on. I guess that's uniform.
Well, that's getting dressed.
Shoes on, but that's
that's getting dressed. But of course, what happens in the morning? Let's take getting dressed as an example. We say, get your uniform on, and they say, I can't find it. Or we say, where are your shoes? And they say, I don't know. And you say, but you wore them home yesterday. Like, it's a finite universe. The house isn't that big. How could your shoes get lost? And you can see what's happening, right? Your emotions start to go up, so your intelligence starts to go down. But emotions are contagious, and so your child catches the emotion. They say, I don't know. I had them yesterday, and they're gone. And so all of a sudden, we've got these 2 really emotionally heightened people that are yelling at each other about the shoes that were worn home yesterday, and now we can't find them. And it's the same with breakfast. You need to eat breakfast. It's healthy. It's the most important meal of the day. Your brain needs it. Your body needs it. You're not going to do well at school if you don't have it. And the kid's saying, but I hate Wheat Bix. Wheat Bix is the worst. And so we have this great big fight over food in the mornings. We can change that. And we can create a sense of so much more space in the mornings by doing a couple of simple things. Number 1, remember that your morning begins the night before. So imagine if every night, shortly after dinner and shortly before bedtime, we said to the kids, all right, our evening routine is that we get ready for tomorrow morning. So let's make sure we know where our shoes are, we know where our socks are, we know where our sports uniform is, we know where our library books are, we know where our lunchbox is, and that it's been emptied. And we spend 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes getting everything ready tonight so that tomorrow morning when we wake up, the uniform's laid out on the bed. The shoes are at the foot of the bed. Do you know, it's all ready to go. We can do the same thing with breakfast. This might sound a little bit extra, but some years ago when we were in the thick of raising these 6 young kids, I mean, our children are all getting older now, so we don't have to be quite like this anymore. But when we really needed it, this is what we did. After dinner, we gave the children, you know, when you stay at a cheap roadside motel as you're driving to Queensland from Sydney or something like that, and they give you the little menu and they say, if you'd like room service tomorrow morning, just tick what you want. And there's the fruit juice and the toast and the eggs and all that sort of stuff. We built one of those little menus and laminated it for the kids. And each night after dinner, they looked at their little menu and they ticked with a whiteboard marker, they ticked what they wanted for breakfast. And we gave them every option you can imagine, like eggs however you want, yogurt, fruit juice and toast and all the different cereals that you can imagine that we were okay with the kids eating. So we didn't have the Cocoa Pops, for example, but we gave them this really expansive menu. And at night, they would tick what they wanted for breakfast the next day. Now, our job as parents is to make sure that it's available in the fridge. That's pretty much it. And then in the morning, once they woke up and their uniform was on, they walked into the kitchen and instead of going, oh, what should I have for breakfast? And you know how they open the fridge and they just stare at it for 2 minutes? And you're like, you're letting all the cold air out of the fridge, close the fridge. What do you, like, it's not a television, for goodness sakes. Instead of doing that, they would walk over and they would pick up their menu from the night before and they'd say, oh, it looks like I'm having this for breakfast this morning because that's what I decided last night. And so it took away all of the brain drain. It took away all the struggle of making decisions because they'd already made that decision. That's the first idea. Your morning begins the night before. And if you can, make as many decisions the night before as you can for the next morning. The next idea is wake the kids up 10 minutes earlier than normal and wake them up with a smile. Because often we wake them up by going, hey, come on, I've asked you 3 times, 4 times. This is the 5th time. Get out of bed. How hard is it? I know it's cold, but just get up. I turn on the air conditioning, get going. And we kind of get really frustrated with the kids, right? It makes such a difference when you walk into their room 10 minutes early, you sit on the bed and you give them a squeezy hug. Maybe you massage their back and you tickle their arms and you give them a little bit of that beautiful parental touch that children just come alive with. And as you sit there and you do all of that, you're building that connection and you're letting them feel loved. And then you can say, hey, sweetheart, what are you looking forward to today? And you can talk to them about what's good that's coming up today. That motivates them. They want to get up so they can get on with their exciting day because they've got all these good things happening. And I think the third thing and the final thing that I would mention, because otherwise we're going to talk all day and I know you've got a lot of questions, but the third thing that I would say would be, instead of telling them what to do, just put a list together. Like this weekend, jot down a little list, print it up, put some pictures on there, and it's just a checklist. I need to do these 4 or 5 things in the morning. And when you see your child staring blankly at the wall, going, oh, because they haven't woken up properly yet, instead of saying, hey, hurry up, you need to do this, and telling them what to do, instead you can just say, what's next on your list? Or you can say, you seem to be stuck. Do you need some help? And so instead of being in that correction and direction mode, you're in connection mode and you're working with them instead of commanding and controlling them all the time. Just by doing that, you're changing the feeling of your home. You're changing the feeling of the relationship. Everything shifts with a simple couple of strategies like that. To answer the other part of your question, though, what else can we do to create more time? We have to be intentional. There's no other way for it than to be intentional. We have to make a commitment. So there's this beautiful research idea about time that comes from a research psychologist called Bridget Schull. And her idea is that time in the modern world exists not in chunks like it once upon a time existed, but rather it exists like confetti. We have time confetti filtering through our day. So we've got 30 seconds of time here and 2 minutes of time there. Maybe we're standing in line at the checkout. We've got 90 seconds before we get to the checkout, or 3 minutes or 5 minutes before the load of washing finishes, and we can hang it out. And what we often do, and I'm sure you're aware, you might be better than this, Melody, but most of us, what we do when we've got 2 minutes with nothing to do, well, we can't stand to be bored. So we pull out our phone and we stare at it. And she calls these moments time confetti. But what if we use those moments of time confetti when we're in the car with the kids as an opportunity to connect? And what if we had some fun conversations rather than how was your day? So I've got a list of conversations in the book, The Parenting Revolution, that you can have with your kids to take advantage of time confetti. An example might be, hey, I was thinking today, if Jurassic Park was real, would we visit? And all of a sudden, you're having this amazing conversation with your kids. Or another one of my favorites that I love to ask my kids is, imagine you're in the library and you found a book and it was the story of your life. You picked it up and started reading and you got to today. Would you turn the page? Would you want to know what happens next? Or would you put the book back on the shelf? Like those kinds of conversations with your kids. Who are the 3 most interesting people you can imagine having at dinner? Who would you invite to dinner? If you were stuck on a deserted island, what are the 5 things that you would make sure you had so that you could survive? Having these kinds of conversations with your kids, it changes the relationship. And you're taking advantage of the time confetti. And all of a sudden, it feels like you've got time because you're having meaningful connection, even in a 3 or an 8-minute car ride. It changes our sense of time.
It's interesting that you said that because, whenever we think about parenting, whenever we think about getting involved with our children, we're thinking 2 hours, 5 hours, we have to be there, be present. But what you're saying is, even 2 minutes counts. Even 5 minutes counts.
I'm going to say even more than that. I'm a parenting expert. I've got 6 kids. Sometimes I get really frustrated if I have to spend more than 2 minutes or 5 minutes with them. Like, if I've got to do 2 hours, I'm like, oh, this is going to be so boring, really. Now, that's not all the time, obviously, but, and I love to take them camping, and I love to, if I go on a trip, sometimes I'll take them on a trip with me or whatever for work. I do love spending time with my kids, but not all the time. Sometimes I'm over them. Sometimes I'm like, hey, kids, there's a podcast that I've been listening to. It's got 7 minutes to go. I'm so sorry, but I want to hear the end of the podcast. Like, I don't think that we have to be the perfect parent all the time. And the kids can understand that we have our own needs. But if we're pervasively ignoring them, pushing them to the side, then we do damage. We undermine that relationship need. And that's so important. I guess the other thing that I would say is being involved can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how we're involved. So we can have supportive involvement and we can have controlling involvement. Controlling involvement, let's use school as an example. Controlling involvement is when your child comes home from school and you say, what happened today? Show me your homework. What grades are you getting? I need to email the teacher because this is not good enough and we need to make something happen. Controlling parenting, when it comes to involvement, is that in your kid's face all the time. You need to do this, you need to do that. Why haven't you done this already? No, not like that, like this. Whereas supportive parenting, when it comes to education, for example, is how's it going? Do you need any help? What was the latest thing that happened that you think that I need to be aware of? I'm here for you if you need me. So I'll give you an example. My children, when they get to grade 11, I sit them down, Kylie and I sit side by side, and we explain that our children are entering the 2 most important years of school that they've ever been in. Grade 11 and 12, they matter a lot compared to the other 10 years of schooling that they've done. And we say to them, here's the thing. This is your life. We love you. We care about you. We want to know what you want to achieve over the next 2 years. And so we explore our children's goals and where they want to go and what they want to do. Once we've explored, we explain to them that because it's their life, we are not going to tell them what to do. In terms of their schoolwork, we are not going to hassle them. We're not going to pester them. We're not going to ask them about their grades. We're not going to say to them, why are you not in your room doing your study? Because it's up to them. And then we say to them, but we are here to support you. What do you want from us over the next 2 years so that you can achieve those goals? And we empower them to come up with the solutions that they need. Now, that process is not a controlling process. It's a supportive process. And the beautiful thing about that is each of our children has exceeded their expectations in their year 12 exams. And we haven't once said to them, how's it going? Or why aren't you studying? Not once have we pestered them about schoolwork. We've actually essentially let them do it themselves, and they've thrived. They've all scored well above expectation. They've all scored well into the 80s, if not higher, on their ATAR without us saying a word. And because none of them are seeking to be doctors or lawyers or dentists or engineers and needing to get 99, those scores have been ample for what they've wanted to do. It's been an absolute delight to watch that happen. And that happens not from controlling involvement, but from supportive involvement.
And I think it touches a bit on what you said in the book as well. And it's about that trust, to trust that they know to do the right thing and that, they're at that point.
I'm so glad you made that point. It's essential to effective parenting. Trust that your children are going to develop well. Just trust that inside them, they want to do well.
It's so
I know, especially when it looks like they don't want to do well at all.
I want to explore a little bit more about this control, which is one of the other points that you've mentioned, where children need to have that sense of autonomy to be in control. You used the example of the year 12 exams. I'm going to bring it back to primary school age, where my 6-year-old is, and it's an example in your book where you talk about this painting, where this kid comes to you wanting to paint. And your thing is that, we, in terms of giving them this autonomy, in terms of not being in control, it's just mainly you guide them using your wisdom and your parental experience without, controlling them. So in my mind, right, the example that you use, they want to come to you for painting. So in my mind, I'm guiding them by informing them where to paint, where not to paint, where to tell them that, textures can bleed, so they need to put something underneath, to clean the brushes between the colors. So to me, that's guiding them. But what you're saying in the book is that there is actually, what you're doing when you do that is that you're controlling their autonomy. That we should work out an option where they can paint, where I can feel comfortable. What kind of options would they be able to come up with if they haven't had the experience or the wisdom to know that textures will stain the table and that painting on the wall is bad?
Yeah. I love this question because it's such a subtle distinction that it would be easy to shrug our shoulders and say, oh, this is silly. We're getting caught up in such fine detail and it doesn't really matter. And yet the research shows that it not only does it matter, it matters profoundly. So the research that we're talking about here initially was done by a guy called Richard Kestner. He's a Canadian psychologist, and he sat in a room of preschoolers, and these kids were all divided into different groups. And with each group, he gave them different instructions. So in one group, there was a slightly more controlling approach. Guys, you're going to do some painting. You need to use some paper here so it doesn't go everywhere. You need to make sure you're dipping your paint brushes into the water so you don't mix the paints. And they really laid out, here are the rules, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everyone got it? Okay, go for it. With the other kids, he sat down and said, now here's what we're worried about. We don't want the paint to bleed from one color to the other. We don't want to mix the paints. What do you think we can do so that that doesn't happen? And here's something else that we're worried about. So you can see with that parental wisdom, the parental wisdom is guiding the conversation, but it's not guiding the decision. The decision is made by the child rather than the adult, but the parent is guiding the child to realize that this is going to be an issue unless we address it. So it's a really subtle distinction. But what Kestner and his colleagues found is that the kids who were controlled, kids who had their autonomy taken away from them, and they were told, this is what you must do, their paintings tended to be less creative and they showed less motivation for painting. They just didn't really want to do it. They didn't enjoy it as much. But the kids who were involved in the process of making up the rules and figuring out the best way, the kids who were allowed to have a voice, who were given some autonomy over how this could work so that everyone could enjoy the experience, they liked painting more. They were more motivated for the painting, and their paintings were deemed as more creative, more colorful, there was more joy in their painting by people who were rating the paintings of each group, not knowing which group was which. In other words, this subtle distinction of saying to the kids, as an adult, I have some wisdom and I'm a little bit nervous about this. This is the inflection point. You can either say, so therefore you need to A, B, and C. That's the controlling approach. Or you can say, so therefore we need to come up with a solution. What do you think would work? Now, there's one more thing to add here, and it's really important. If your child does not have the wisdom, because they're only 6, and they look at you and they say, I don't know what to do about this. What happens then is, because you've given them the option to think about it and they realize that they don't have a solution, you can then say to them, well, I have an idea. Would you be open to what I have to share? at which point they say, yeah, and you can tell them what you think. And usually they'll say, okay. They're happy to adopt your idea. It doesn't feel controlling because they've invited it, realizing that they don't have an answer. So that way, as the wise parent, you still get to provide the guidance that's appropriate. And sometimes the kids will come up with an idea and it's a terrible idea. And as a parent, you're going, oh no. And so what you can do then is, instead of saying, oh, that's a bad idea, why would you do that? Instead, you just say, well, that's one option. Why don't we try it? Let's see what happens. And when it fails, you can say, I wonder if you can think of any other ideas. Or perhaps it's just a bad idea and you don't want to try it at all because it's terrible. At which point you say, if we do that, I'm nervous that things could go wrong. Can you think of why they would go wrong? And your child says, and you work it out and they say, can you think of any other ideas? And so we're continually bringing them along. Now, here's the profound thing that happens. It internalizes more for them. They're more motivated. They actually buy in. And by doing it the slow way at first, they're going to do it the proper way forever now, because they've figured it out for themselves rather than you telling them to do it against their wishes.
I like that. So yeah, that clicked for me. It's instead, so you see the solution in both scenarios, you see the solution. But the first scenario, it's about telling them, well, this is the solution. And the second is, what can you do to reach that solution?
Correct. Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah. And by doing that, they have a voice. They have a sense of autonomy. I mean, you know this yourself, Melody. When you're doing what you have to do because you have to do it because somebody told you to do it, you just do it because it has to be done. But when you're choosing to do it a certain way, you put your heart into it so much more. You're much more motivated. You want to be there. You want to be doing it because this is your choice. If somebody told you in this podcast conversation, you need to talk to Justin, you need to ask him these questions, and these are the outcomes we're looking for, I'm sure because you're a conscientious and diligent person, you would do a good job, but you would have a checklist and you would just be going through it. And I guess you'd call it going through the motions. But because you do this out of love, you love running this podcast, you love having these conversations, you sat down and you read my book. And you thought about it and you've come up with and crafted questions that satisfy your curiosity. And as I'm answering the questions, your engagement with what I'm saying is different to what it would be had somebody handed you a list of questions and said, ask Justin this. When we put it in adult terms, it makes so much sense, right? And yet as parents, we just want the kids to do as they're told. We forget that they need to have that intrinsic motivation to move in the direction that makes sense to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll move on to the final point, the final principle that you mentioned, which is that children crave the desire to master something, to feel capable. I don't have a question for this. I just have to say that it hit home because I have a 6-year-old who, for certain things, gives up immediately when he tries and it doesn't get it this first time. It's just like, oh, no, I'm not going to do it. But when you break that same thing down into the little steps and he accomplishes the little steps, you see him beaming. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think I just want to say that hit home.
Well, let me add a couple of quick things to this. In the book, I was explicit about this. Competence needs are fragile. And when we spend all of our time telling our kids what they're doing wrong, we hurt our relationship with them because they feel incompetent, they feel incapable, they feel like they can't do it. It feels too hard. And you know yourself as an adult, when there's something in front of you that just feels mountainous, well, quite often we don't want to climb that mountain. But when we work with our kids and help them to develop their competence and their capability and push them just that little bit further than they think they can go without cracking the whip and being horrible to them or anything like that, as you said, they start to beam, they come alive. We see that kids don't want to go to school. Why? Because they don't feel competent. We see kids don't want to play a musical instrument or play a sport. Why? Because they don't feel competent. We get so caught up in comparison and competition, and our kids end up feeling like they can't be enough. But if we just focus on doing things because it builds relationships and doing things because we develop a sense of mastery, all of a sudden that motivation goes up so much. We get such good results.
I'm going to change tack a little bit because, we're talking about connecting with children. And the way that the conversation that we've had so far, it really sounds like, we're raising rational, beautiful angels.
Yeah.
the reality is that children will act out, they will misbehave. What do you do when that happens? In other words, what's your take on consequences on negative behavior?
Okay, so when children behave in what I'm going to call challenging ways, I don't believe that kids want to be naughty. They want to do well, but when their needs are not being met, they respond in ways that are not always desirable, right? Like sometimes they're just a pain in the backside. And when that's happening, we've got to remember, and I've mentioned this already, high emotions, low intelligence. So if we get really angry, we'll act like fools. But similarly, they'll catch our emotions and or maybe we're catching their emotion anyway, and they'll be up there and they'll act silly as well, right? So when children are being challenging, our number one job is to help them to be calm. But walking into the room and saying, you need to calm down is the least effective way of doing that. Like nobody in the history of being told to calm down has ever calmed down. They get angrier, not more calm. So it's really tricky for us to calm them down. And that's why we've got to stay calm, because emotions are contagious. And if they can see that we've got it under control, they're much more likely to match us eventually. Sometimes, honestly, Melody, sometimes you've just got to let them go and scream their head off. Sometimes you've just got to leave them in their room so that they can tell the whole world, I hate you, nothing's fair, I hate my life. So like sometimes you've just got to let the kids have their vent. Like even you as an adult, when you're having a bad time, every now and again, you just go into the bathroom, you shut the door and you go, "Argh!" And like sometimes you've just got to let it out. Doesn't usually make us feel better, but sometimes we need that. Or sometimes I know when my wife is upset, I'll say to her, Kylie, do you want me to be with you right now, or do you want some space? Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to get outside into nature so you can breathe again? Or do you want to talk things over? And quite often Kylie will say, I just need some space right now. So I think it's important when the kids are being challenging, to the extent that we can, we either help them to calm down, or we give them some space, or we get them out of the situation. We do whatever we need to do that's humane and kind, but we try to help them to be calm. Once they're calm, that's when we work on things. Trying to fix things in the moment never works. Melody, I presume that every now and again you are not at your best, and maybe every now and again your husband says to you, I have some advice for you, Melody, and tries to tell you how you should fix yourself. I don't know if that's ever happened, but from the smile on your face, I'm guessing it might have. And have you ever looked at him and said, I admire your wisdom so much. Please tell me, how do I be a better wife? Like, it does.
No.
No, the answer is just no. You look at him and you say, what would you know? Be quiet. You don't know anything. Leave me alone. I'm only in this mess because of you in the first place. Like we get upset when people try to tell us what to do. But if he gives you either that hug that you need, or if he gives you the space that you've asked for, in 5 minutes or 10 minutes when your emotions are settled again, then the two of you can have a really calm, rational conversation. You can't logic your way through an emotion. But what you can do with your children is you can say, all right, half an hour ago, you were really upset. We need to talk about that. Half an hour ago, a couple of things happened that were not okay. What was going on? And how can we make sure that doesn't happen again? So the process is deal with it in the moment, however you need to. But once things are calm, have a conversation where you explore what happened, explain what you need, and then empower your child to work with you on coming up with a solution that is sensible and appropriate for next time.
And I think from what I got it from that as well, is just for my own personal sake, is not to react to the anger or the negative emotions, because it influences me as well. And then it gets higher and higher. And
yeah. And you've got to remember, it's not about you. This is about them and their ability to control themselves. This is not about you.
So what about in terms of, I guess, like in terms of the bigger negative things where, they might be breaking the law, like shoplifting or like underage drinking.
Yeah.
How do you do, a lot of parents will go, well, that's it, you're grounded.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
All right. So there's a couple of things that we need to talk about here. First of all, if we get our parenting right from the start, or as early as possible, the earlier we can move into need supportive parenting as our parenting style, research shows that children of parents who parent this way, specifically adolescents, are less likely to be involved in alcohol and other drugs. They're less likely to be involved in delinquent behavior or promiscuity. They're less likely to make harmful choices, and they're much more likely to be pro-social. They're much more likely to do well at school. They're much more likely to be great kids. Now, that's not a guarantee. There are always going to be some kids who, no matter what you do, their personality is such that they just have to do it their way, and they have to push all the boundaries and push all the buttons, and that's fine. That happens no matter what. But usually, if the more you can parent this way, the less likely it is that you find yourself in that situation. However, if you are just starting to parent this way, or you want to parent this way, and at the moment you're dealing with these challenges, this is where it gets really tricky, because there's all these old patterns of behavior, and now we're trying to start new patterns. So there's going to be a little bit of friction, a bit of tension. But here's what I would do if one of my children did something absolutely silly, absolutely stupid. If they got caught shoplifting, if they were underage drinking, I'd sit down with them and say, hey, I'm aware of what happened. What's going on that makes you feel like this is necessary? Now, they're probably going to go, don't want to talk to you. At which point I'll say, okay, well, that means that we've got a relationship problem. So before I worry about the underage drinking and before I worry about the shoplifting, I actually need to restore this relationship. And usually, I mean, I'll talk to parents who'll say, yeah, I used to have a great relationship with my kid, but then they became a teenager and we just don't have a relationship anymore. And so my response to that is, well, what are you doing together? And I say, oh, they don't want to spend any time with me. Well, what do they want to do? And how can you do that together? Can you take them on a trip? Can you go camping? Can you spend some time at the beach? Can you take them to see that movie that they wanted to see? Can you take them to their favorite cafe? Which, let's face it, if you've got a teenager, they probably want to go to somewhere like Grilled. So it's not going to break the bank. Go and spend $17 on a burger and take them out for Grilled, and they'll think that you're amazing. And it'll be the best investment ever. Or take them down to their favorite cafe on a Saturday morning and just chat with no agenda. Or like do the things that you used to do when they were younger, because you used to have that relationship. Relationships, as you mentioned before, love is spelled T-I-M-E. And if kids are acting out, it's usually because they're not feeling any of that L-O-V-E, because they're not getting any of the T-I-M-E. So build the relationship. This is a slow thing. Like sometimes, Melody, there's not a quick fix. Sometimes we just have to work through the rebuilding of trust, the rebuilding of a relationship. And as that happens, then hopefully we can start to then talk about the other things. And again, it's the same process that I mentioned. Once the relationship feels strong and your children feel that they can trust you and they feel like you trust them, you explore what's going on, you explain what your expectations are. You know what, if you're going to stay in my home and have my support, I mean, I'll love you no matter what. But I can't support you if you're going to be stealing. I can't support you if you're going to be bringing alcohol and drugs into the home and you're only 16. I can't support those things. So we need to work out how we can figure this out, where we can go from here. What do you need from me? What do we do in our relationship to help you to make safe, healthy choices? And this is it's a tough conversation, but usually you won't be having those conversations based on the stats until your kids are 17, 18, 19. It's pretty rare that that sort of thing will happen at 12 or 13, unless there's been a whole lot of challenge, difficulty, and stress in your parenting and in your family dynamic.
It's interesting. So what you're saying is don't react to, well, it's not about reacting to that thing that triggered that conflict or that negative behavior, but it's to look further back to find out what has led to that particular action.
Yeah. Maybe I can share a story of a family that I know. This family had a blanket no alcohol rule, just no alcohol, full stop, end of story. The parents didn't drink alcohol, and they just said to their kids, well, if you live in our home, you don't drink alcohol. Well, one night at about 11 p.m., they got a phone call from their 19, 20-year-old son, and he was blind drunk. He'd gone out to a party, gotten completely drunk, and he rang his parents just to say, I love you, Mum, I love you, Dad. And I mean, he was completely obliterated. And they said, where are you? They found out the address of the party, and they said, we're coming to get you right now. And when they picked him up, he got in the car, and the dad just blew up. Absolutely lost it, and just said, I can't believe it. You're drunk, you're this, you're that. And the kid said, oh, I'm so sorry. And it felt really bad. This was the first time he'd ever gotten drunk. He'd only had a few shots, but he had blown himself apart because he'd never had alcohol before. Dad laid into him, sped all the way home, zooming around corners to show everyone how angry he was. And Mum sitting in the car saying, would you just calm down? Just saying, I'm so angry. Anyway, he got in touch with me and said, I think I got it wrong. And I said, yeah, there are better ways that you could have handled that. And he said, oh, yeah, I thought so. What should I have done? I said, it doesn't matter what you should have done. It's what you do now. I said, he needs to hear the 3 most important words that any parent can ever say to their child. He said, all right, yeah, I've told him that I love him already. And I said, no, they're not the 3 most important words. He said, well, what are they? I said, it's no matter what. They've got to hear I love you, but it's the 3 words that come after that that matter so much. I said, you've got to go to him and you've got to say, son, you know, what happened the other night it really affected me and I was really mad and I behaved poorly. I said, you need to apologize for that. And you need to let him know that you love him no matter what. Even if he goes out every Saturday night and gets blind drunk, you love him no matter what, because you've got to restore the relationship and he's got to know that he can trust you. If he doesn't trust you, you're not going to get anywhere with him ever again. And so he went and had that conversation. He said, son, I'm so sorry. I blew it. I drove like an idiot. I treated you badly. I've judged you harshly. I'm really worried about what happened, but you need to know, in spite of all of that, I love you no matter what, no matter what. And his son broke down and said, Dad, I'm so sorry. And they had this beautiful conversation about what to do from here. How does this boy, I mean, the son actually said to him, Dad, I've never drunk before, and I just wanted to try it. And it was fun, but it also was something that I didn't like. I didn't like the feeling, and I don't think that I ever want to do it again. But had the dad not had the conversation, maybe the son might have gone, well, Dad doesn't care. Dad's angry at me. I'm going to go out and do it again and again and again because who cares anymore? But because he had that conversation, his son had this complete shift in the way that he was approaching his dad and approaching the issue. I don't know about you, Melody, but I think that's a profoundly instructive story for how we can respond to our children's challenging behavior, even when the stakes are high.
I really like that. And I think what you've proven through this whole conversation is that at the end of the day, it's that connection and that relationship that will trump, well, it has to be that warm, loving, unconditional relationship that will trump everything.
And those 3 words, no matter what, that's what it says. It's unconditional. And here's the funny thing about love. If it's not unconditional, I don't think that it's love.
Yeah.
Right? But we need to make it explicit. We need to say no matter what, because when they hear it, there's something that happens inside them where they go, okay, I'm safe here. And that changes the relationship profoundly. In fact, I might even mention it doesn't just work for kids. It works for husbands and wives as well.
I'm try that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like when you're having conflict with your spouse and you can look at them and say, this is a really big conflict, but our relationship is so much bigger than this conflict. And when we can say to our spouse, and so even though I'm really frustrated right now, I love you no matter what, it changes the tone of the conflict. It changes the tone of the disagreement. And all of a sudden you remember that, oh yeah, this relationship matters so much more than this issue that we're dealing with right now. We can get through this.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your words of wisdom. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
That's a pleasure.